please. Hilariously, I've been given this. That would be a first, but this lady's going to use it. I ain't going to use it, but I love it. The notion that I even could is fabulous. All right, esteemed speakers, dear audience, a very, very warm welcome to this S&D Group workshop, Social Progress in Action, Fair Minimum Wages for Workers in Europe. Firstly, as you see, we have interpretation. English on 2, Spanish on channel 8, French on 3, German on 1, Italian on 4, and Bulgarian on 21. Please make sure that you are set up, that you are tuned to the right channel, and please also make sure that your mobile phones are on silent. That's very important. My name is Katrina Sickle. I have the privilege of navigating us all through the next, not now 3 hours, it's a shorter event. We are finishing at 5:45 on the dot. So, all of that time for lots of very fruitful discussion between a lineup of eloquent speakers and your good selves, the audience. Between us, we're going to unpack the topic on the table in 2 75-minute panel debates. Those are topped and tailed by some opening and closing words. Don't forget that at any point we have water and coffee on tap. If you need to just pop and get some, it's there and round the corner. What we'll look at together is, of course, the state of play of the implementation of the Minimum Wage Directive in member states, adopted in October 2022 for transposition international law by now, 15th of November 2024. I'm going to cut so much of my preamble now because our event is shorter. Suffice to say, whilst the directive has indeed influenced minimum wage setting and, of course, importantly, collective bargaining in various member states, there is no shortage of evidence which will be brought into play today that demonstrates where national governments are not taking sufficiently into account the 4 guiding criteria and the indicative reference values. And so we will talk about what's next, what can be done, and of course, the action plan that has to be in place if the collective bargaining coverage target of 80% is not met. All right, that's enough from me, because I ain't the expert. Let me hand over the floor to our first speaker. A very warm welcome to MEP Gabby Bischoff. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And in the name of the S&D Group, I really warmly welcome you all to this event. I think it's very important to do our political battles, to win, but then also we have to look what is going to happen with what we achieved. And therefore, I'm very happy to have you all here for this workshop, that we look at social progress in action and see how the implementation of this important directive is going to take place. And it's an opportunity for us all to reflect on what our political family can achieve and has achieved. That is very important for millions of workers. And we are in a week and a day to day. This is why we always have to improvisate a lot, where we will have important decisions here going on around. And therefore, it's very good also to focus really on what we achieved. And for us as a group, this was really a historical achievement. And it was really a monumental step forward for millions of workers in Europe. And it gives us really a tool, this directive, so that more people in Europe can make ends meet and have more money in their pockets. And it is really one of our key demands where we deliver here, and that we say work must pay. And therefore, we are very happy that we managed to achieve this in a time where prices are skyrocketing on food, transportation, energy, housing. And moreover, really, it will not only bring more money in the pockets, but also strengthen collective bargaining in the member states. And we know that minimum wages are important, but the real music is there also, where we have collective bargaining for better pay, working conditions, and all of that. And therefore, I'm very, very grateful to have two people here today discussing with us and giving speeches. And the first one is Nicolas Schmidt. And when someone personally asks me, and Agnes, who will be here in a minute, that we have two really, I would say, minimum wage heroes. For me, it's Nicolas and Agnes. And people can make a difference in their positions. Because without these two, and many, many here I see activists, colleagues that supported it, we wouldn't have this conference today. And therefore, I'm very happy to have you here, our champions for these directives. Really, at the same time, this would not be possible without the strong trade union movement that kept pushing to come up here with this directive. So, and we will value this historically because also we know that majorities shifted in this parliament and that it was an historic window we had and we used it. And I'm very proud of that. And we will watch it like our jewel and we will make sure that it is also implemented. And this is why we want to take stock here today. What is the implementation rate at the moment? What do we still have to do to make sure that really all workers that are entitled can profit from it? And therefore, I'm also very happy that we have distinguished experts here that did and do research and will enlighten us so that we can really take stock, but also look at the still white spots where we really need good strategies to make sure that also there it will be implemented. So we have seen some member states, and I will cut it short because we are running out of time. We will hear it later. I know the ETUI did great research also here, that it already in some member states, like in Poland, like in Bulgaria, people could really profit, but also that we use this as a drive to come up also to push the other member states. And if I say push, I also think about my member state where I come from, Germany, to take it really serious. And the next commission, this was also something we emphasized in the hearings, that they will really monitor the implementation of this directive. And Roxana Minsantu, as designated commissioner, promised that here, really, that she will also prioritize it and that this will be done. So, to cut it short, I think we had a deadline in November. We have another one for next year on the collective bargaining. We have other tools that we want to use, additional tools like social conditionalities. We are pushing very much in this term, really, and I'm looking at Estelle as our coordinator so that we can further support collective bargaining. For example, this is why we want a revision of the public procurement directives and get additional pressure here on companies and member states. And that's all in a time where still we have a cost of living crisis, we have a social housing crisis, and it's really time to deliver for our citizens. And this is why I'm really looking forward to this exchange. If you run out at some certain times, we will always come back, but then we will have short meetings in between, because as I said, the negotiation process in the House is going on between the political groups on a possible agreement or not. But it gives us strength also for these negotiations, that if we focus, if we fight together, we can win together. And in this sense, I will hand over back to you.
Do you want that? You can have that if you want. Thank you very much. I've never heard opening words that have such rich vocabulary. Monumental step forward, historical achievement, and I think the word was it's a jewel. But as you cautioned there, that was at a very particular, you said, a historic window of opportunity. So we do want to look at, right, the state of implementation and where there are the gaps, what can we look at doing? So that is obviously, it's a real balance. We don't want you all to go out of this room going, oh God. We want this to be a celebration, but also a kind of a positive, a constructive and a practical look forward at what could be done to increase enforcement in that implementation. But here you are, you've been called a hero of the minimum wage. No, take it on the chin. Come on, I wouldn't do that. You've been called a hero. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gabi. Thank you, dear friends. So first, I'm very pleased to be here and to discuss with you this monumental achievement, which is true. I think for the Social Democratic family, it is an extremely important achievement. We have talked about that for years, and finally we made it. We made it because we were stubborn, and as you mentioned, we were able to seize the right opportunity. And you should never, never let a good opportunity just pass away. And we did the right thing at that moment. And so we got this important directive. First, I want to thank all those. You know, in history, there are the heroes, and there are all those around. And I am very proud to be the father and the mother together with Agnes, but we could only achieve what we have achieved because there was a strong family around us. And the strong family is the S&D family, a few others who supported us, I have to be fair, and especially also our friends from the unions. Because I think without the unions, we would not have been able, and that's there, even during the night, we were able to phone and say, can we do that, like that, and so on. So it was a collective achievement of the progressive family. And I hope that in the future, we will still be able to celebrate similar collective achievements. Now, that's why it's very good to have this exchange, because once you get a directive, and even once you get the directive transposed, that's not the end of the story. I would say then the story really begins. And I think this is what has to be done. Because we all know that those who say, well, okay, we have now this directive, and we will see, and we will handle it in a way that at the end, it will not finally bring the results some people expected it to bring. And that's our mission now, to watch out and to be very careful about that. And I wish also my successor the energy and a firm political will to make sure that the Commission on this particular directive plays its full role and watches the implementation, not just the transposition, but also the implementation of this directive. Well, we all know that there are huge differences in minimum wages, as there are in wages in the European Union. And this is, for me, not something absolutely normal. 20 years after the big enlargement, that wages are still so different between some parts in the Union and other parts in the Union. There's something going wrong. That's not the promise of Europe. That's not the promise of upward convergence. And now we have a tool, or I would say we have two tools, in a way, to change this. We have the directive on minimum wages, but we especially have also the part in this directive on collective bargaining. Now, what is the aim? The aim is to reduce the gaps, and especially to set minimum wages in the European Union at an adequate level. Now, you know, these are nice words, adequate. And that's why it is so important to give more precision to the words, to a word like adequate, and I will come later to that. It should not remain an abstract concept when we are talking about adequate level of minimum wages. Now, now we are at a special moment. It's one of perhaps my last performance here in the rooms of the European Parliament, and I'm very happy that this moment is about this minimum wages. So adequate minimum wages are an essential policy tool for reducing in-work poverty, and we still have more than 10% in-work poverty in the European Union. Wage inequality, and we know we have a growing wage inequality, as we have a growing inequality in general terms. And when I talk about inequality, I always speak also about inequality between men and women. And the figures show us that when we are talking about inequality and wage inequality and minimum wages, who is the biggest number on minimum wage in our member states? Women. And paradoxically, very often in those jobs we need most. And we have seen that during the pandemic, absolutely, because it's in the care, but not just in the care, it's in the shops, it's in many, many professions where women are the majority and where minimum wages are paid, or sometimes even not paid. So I think this is also an instrument to fight and to combat the gender pay gap, and this has been complemented also by the Wage Transparency Directive. So now we have, Gabi has already insisted on that, this directive came at a very special moment, because it came at a moment where suddenly Europe rediscovered inflation. And inflation hit millions and millions of workers, millions and millions of families who suddenly did not know how to make ends meet. And I think this is finally the proof that we need an instrument to make wages follow prices. That was for a very long time something economists say, no, wages should never follow prices. Wages are a driver of inflation. We have seen that this was wrong and still is. Wages were not the driver of prices. Wages were the victims of price-driving forces in our economy. And that's why it is particularly important that we have the possibility to adapt wages to the cost of living crisis we had. And when we look at the figures, we are not yet there. In most of the countries, wages are still running behind prices. Wages have not recovered the inflation rates we had during the COVID and especially post-COVID years. And that's about adequacy, finally, because when we are talking about adequacy and we have wages which do not follow price increases, which do not follow, by the way, also productivity. We had over years a situation where wages remained behind productivity. Now we have a long and very rich and interesting discussion on productivity. Nobody says that for a long time, wages did not follow productivity gains. And this is also an important element to take into account. Now, minimum wages should be sufficient to provide workers a decent standard of living, and this is unfortunately not always the case. And I have already said that material and social deprivation affected more than 9% of workers across the EU in 2023. Minimum wages should also be fair vis-à-vis the other wages. Again, there is ample room for improvement in this regard in many member states, because in 23 in the EU, 1 in 12 workers were at risk of poverty. In the majority of member states, statutory minimum wages for full-time employees are below the famous 60% of the median wage or the 50% of the average wage. But as you all know, we now have, for the first time, a legal instrument in place. This is the Directive on Adequate Minimum Wages in the EU. The fact that we managed to adopt this directive during the past mandate should make us all proud, and in particular some of the MEPs who are here today. Now, she's not yet here, but Gabi is here, a few others may be here, to finally exchange and also look forward. That's why the timing of this meeting is so appropriate. I will first recall which are the key elements of the directive and what the state of play of its transposition is, and especially also the next steps for its implementation, and the important role that social partners should play in this regard. First, the minimum wage directive aims to improve the adequacy, and adequacy of statutory minimum wages is obviously one of the main objectives, but it's also about promoting collective bargaining and enhancing the effective access of workers to minimum wage protection. It's not just to have a minimum wage, it also is important to have access to minimum wage and not to be discriminated. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people who are discriminated, who do not get the full access of an existing minimum wage. And so it does so in full respect of national competencies. Well, that's normal. We have different systems of minimum wage in the European Union. We didn't want to change them, but we wanted to create, nevertheless, a common standards, because otherwise it would not make a difference, and to make sure that national systems finally respect the fundamental objectives. Because as I already mentioned it, it's not just about an abstract idea. It's about one of the essential promises of the European Union, which is upward convergence. To promote the adequacy of statutory minimum wages, the directive includes clear criteria, indicative reference values, the famous 60 and 50%, regular and timely updates. This is very important of minimum wages, and especially in a period of high inflation. We need this timely and regularly updates. The establishment of consultative bodies, and here when I say consultative bodies, it includes also absolutely the social partners and particularly the trade unions. And last but not least, the effective and timely involvement of social partners precisely. Furthermore, the directive explicitly focuses on the promotion of collective bargaining. Traditional collective bargaining structures have been eroding during recent decades in many member states, and this decline in collective bargaining means that in some member states, the share of workers covered by a collective agreement has substantially diminished. The directive aims to reverse this trend by requiring all member states, with the involvement of the social partners, to facilitate the exercise of the right to collective bargaining on wage setting and to increase the collective bargaining coverage rate up to the famous 80%. Now, according to the currently available OECD figures, this would apply only at this moment to 19 member states are below the 80%. So majority of countries are below the 80%. Only a few ones are above. And when I say are above, I must also ask for caution, because some are apparently above, but you have to look a bit deeper in the way how collective bargaining is organized. Because if collective bargaining is not a real bargaining, if the collective agreements finally are negotiated between unequal partners, and we have a certain number of countries or companies where finally collective agreements are not negotiated by unions, or if they are called unions, they are not real unions. Well, we all know what the result of these collective agreements and this bargaining will be. Now, what is for me extremely important is also the public procurement issue, because we need not just to have a directive, good standards, good levels, we need particularly also leverages. And public procurement is a leverage which should be used. And now in Germany, there's a discussion about that, about public procurement, no company taking part in public procurements if there is no collective agreement agreed, if there is one. And I think this is an instrument we should not just use, but member states should use, but should really be encouraged and should be much more compulsory. This is the only way, because as we know, the important part of public procurements in our economy, this is extremely important. Now, we have worked now on the first step, which is transposition. We have put into place a working group to help member states to do the transposition. We have now got 15 member states who say that they have transposed. A few say they have only partially transposed. This is now the role of the Commission to follow up on the transposition, first of those who say that they have, to see if the transposition is correct in relation to the directive text. And second, obviously, to incentivize those who have not yet done this. I think this is now an important role also of the next Commission during the next months, to make sure that as soon as possible all member states will transpose. And then obviously Article 17.3 requires member states to take adequate measures to ensure the effective involvement of the social partners in the implementation of the directive. This is also, we like talking about social dialogue in Europe. Yes, this is very important, but it's not just about talking about social dialogue. We have to make sure that social dialogue is effective, that social dialogue produces results, that social partners are involved, and that they really take part also in the implementation of such an important task. Now, I want just to say one last word. Yes, I know I'm always too long.
You told me to.
Yeah, you know, that's my monument, you know. That's why I'm so long. One word to those who do not have collective agreements, because I know I had some difficulties with a few countries, not all of them, a few countries who have no statutory collective agreement, who have only collective bargaining. First, perfect for me, I always said that. That's the best solution. Please do everything to protect your collective bargaining system. That would be my advice and my wish, because you know that this collective bargaining system is or will be under attack. We have seen it with this crazy guy from the US who tries it in Sweden. We see it with some governments also in the northern part of Europe. So do everything to protect your collective bargaining system. If the collective bargaining system works fair, as it does in a few countries, Austria, for instance, well, you do not need a statutory minimum wage. Nobody asks you to introduce one. And I think the directive is very clear in that sense. Now, to conclude, well, it's an important step. We have to make it a success, and we have to see above the directive of minimum wage. The minimum wage is a basis, is a foundation for a system of better and fair wages. It's a tool to prevent in-work poverty, but it's not the whole wage policy. It's not the whole wage policy. And I think what is important now in Europe is, what we need in Europe are fair and good wages. We have to invest in our workers. We have to invest in our employees. That's the best solution. But we have also to have strong collective bargaining to make these investments be paid off for the workers. Because we will not have a stronger economy. We will not recover a better growth with low-wage economies, nor in the east, nor in the center, nor in the north, nor in the south. So wages are not just a social or something social. No, wages are a central element of the good functioning of our economy. You will not have good productivity with very low wages. You will only get good productivity if you have good wages. It's both ways, by the way, but it's also this way. productivity is also depending on good wages, on investment in our workers. And that's why this directive is such an important tool, and that's why we have to guarantee that it will be a success. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Spoken like a true hero, I would say. That's what I would absolutely say. One thing that I just wanted to add, and I have a million questions and I can't ask any because, as I said, we are going to finish in a couple of hours, or we've got rich discussions for the next couple of hours. But something I pick up on when I hear Gabby's opening words saying this was a monumental step forward for so many EU workers, and I hear you say, you know, this wage difference, it's absolutely not fulfilling the essential promise of Europe or of upward convergence. So the Commission really has to keep watch. The minimum wage is so popular with the public. It's something I think that in the EU's story with the EU citizens, and it ain't always easy to get that EU added dimension across, this is one very good place to keep that anchored, because that relationship is such a tricky one, and those stories do not always get out there at national level. But you know that better than I. Thank you so much to both of these fabulous opening speakers. I see you again, do yes, I not? You do. And I may see you again, but you said this might be your last hurrah at the European Parliament, this speech. I guess you've got more, right? Got a few more. Couple more.
Who knows?
Who knows? I don't think, but I hope.
Well,
but
if they ask me to do more. I mean,
oh, if they ask you to do more. Thank you. Warm thanks to our opening two speakers, please. Thank you. Thank you. All right, thank you. We have two panels now, okay? So a reminder, we'll probably give an hour to each, perhaps a little more to the first one because we do have more speakers. Now, the first one builds upon everything that we've just heard in those opening speeches. It's called From Law to Reality, Implementing the European Minimum Wage Directive in the Member States. We have 6 speakers, 2 of whom are joining us online. Now, I just want to say one thing. I really would like to make room for questions. I have very politely terrorized our fabulous speakers into being beautifully concise so that there is space for questions. But the deal is, please don't get on your soapbox. A question has a question mark at the end. Just get to the point. That way, more voices can be heard. That's what I'm asking you. And also, I'm relying upon my speakers to be concise because I can't eyeball you very well here, sitting in a line, nor of those online. So, do you want to come to the floor? Ivailo Kalfin from Eurofound, its Executive Director. We've also got Dr. Torsten Müller from the European Trade Union Institute, which is, of course, the independent research and training centre of the European Trade Union Confederation. Here, a warm welcome to you, Professor Dr. Sascha Garben. Now, you are a permanent professor of EU law at the Legal Studies Department of the College of Europe, but you're also an official in the Commission at DG Employment, but you're on permanent leave, or currently on leave. And who else do we have? We also have Elmar Smit. Oh, you're all miles away, but at least I can see you. Hello. Hi, Elmar Smit from the Netherlands Trade Union Confederation. Very, very much all of this, your baby. Online, I don't know where I see you online, but online we have Ozra Januszkiewicz, who is International Secretary of the Lithuanian Trade Union Confederation. We should also have, who else do we have there? Okay, we've got a little bit of a change of speaker. We've got Rosica Makilova, who is going to be speaking on behalf of Dr. Lyuboslav Kostov. So this is really the viewpoints of the Institute for Social and Trade Union Research and Training. And I know Rosica has been very much involved in this transposition. She is scientific secretary at the Institute for Social and Trade Union Research and Training. And who else do we also have? Is that everybody? Yes, I've done the maths. Fantastic. All right, that's enough blather from me. I'm going to hand over the floor directly to the gentleman on my left because you've been doing so much. I think you had a pilot project, did you not, over the last few years that's really been looking at what's been happening with the minimum wage. So you are the person to come with a lot of information. I think you can start with giving us some of those details on the implementation, if you will.
Sure. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the S&D group for the invitation. I would like to start where Commissioner Schmidt finished. I mean, actually, where he started. We are at the, I would add another adjective to this directive, which is a miracle, because a few years ago nobody believed even that such a legislation would be possible. Well, it is possible. It is another achievement of the EU law. And now we are at the beginning, indeed, of a road, which what was mentioned by Commissioner Schmidt, with the implementation and with the proper implementation of the directive, so that it brings the results that are very much taught by its creators. Eurofound is doing not only, there is indeed a pilot project on minimum wages, but since 2018 we follow the minimum wages and produce an annual review report. Last one was published in August this year. And we also have country profiles for the minimum wages for the member states, mentioning what are the minimum wages, mechanisms to set them, main players, so anybody who is interested who can go to the website, and we are constantly updating this. What we see, I mean, I would like to focus on the conclusions that we have seen in the last report. Three things. First, even before the transposition, the full transposition of the directive, we see that there is already an effect, an impact, a positive impact on the minimum wages. It's mere adoption. What we see in 2023, I mean, the data that we have is until first half of this year. So what we see in 2023 is that the trend of decreasing the minimum wage with respect to the inflation, I mean the real minimum wage and the real incomes, is turned. And now the minimum wage is growing faster than the inflation, in particular in some countries, but across all the countries in the European Union, the minimum wage is growing faster than the inflation. The slowest this happens in the countries where there is no minimum wage. So wherever you have a minimum wage as a legal instrument, it goes much faster. Second, member states started focusing on the issue of adequacy of that is required from the directive, and it has two strands. One is the fairness of the minimum wage, and the other is the living standards. Most of the countries addressed already, in a way, the fairness. So most of the countries that already reacted, even before adopting a full legislation on this. And fairness is very much linked to the average or median wage, which are the referential values there, but also to some other criteria that would enter a particular formula. So what we see is that in a number of countries there is a positive movement in adopting further criteria. These are countries like Bulgaria, Italy, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Estonia, Lithuania, Germany, Spain. In some countries, like for example Bulgaria, you have a formula, you have a linkage to the average wage in the country, which led to a very fast increase of the minimum wage. In other countries, you have a formula-based approach, which means that you have different criteria, different factors with different weights that enter into a formula. And these are countries like France, Germany, Poland, Belgium, Netherlands. What are the criteria that are taken into consideration in most of the countries? This is inflation in 14 countries, specific national criteria in 10 member states, target percentage of wages in 8 member states, unemployment, wage level, gross domestic product, etc., etc. So this is a range of different criteria that different national legislations decide how to adapt them to their national conditions. This part, this strand of the minimum wage directive, the fairness, we see more activity there. While on the other strand, which is the achieving good, decent living standards, we don't see so much development. And frankly, the problem, and this is one of the challenges in the future, this is to define, and it's difficult to give a definition across all the EU member states, but still to define how each member state goes towards living standards. Because now what we at Eurofound, for example, we are measuring, these are how many people on minimum wage have difficulties to make ends meet, which is certainly a proxy. But it is ignoring eventually social system contributions, taxation systems in the member states, etc., etc. So the living standards would depend on a broader spectrum of factors than the minimum wage. And again, a methodology for that has to be there. However, we have only 2 countries that we see that are already thinking about including this criteria into their national legislation. The third thing, and I'll finish with that, is the impact on competitiveness, on collective bargaining. And Commissioner Schmidt already mentioned that there are 8 countries that are above the 80%, and he's absolutely right. I'm not going to go into details how that works. All the others are under the target of 80% coverage of the collective bargaining. 4 of them are under 20% even. I mean, if you look, the more problematic countries are Central Eastern European countries with the expansion of collective bargaining. What we see is some positive development after the adoption of the directive in few countries. For example, in Romania, there is a new law on the social dialogue that was adopted last year. In the Czech Republic, there is a draft regulation for collective bargaining, enhancing and making it possible to go further. In Portugal, there are 2 tripartite agreements in 2022 and 2023 on expanding collective bargaining. And in Ireland, there is a work of a high-level group that recommended possible measures how to expand collective bargaining. So in most of the other countries, we don't see any movement, and I hope that with the transposition of the directive, all these questions of how to define the fair living, the living standards, and how to expand the collective bargaining are going to find their national answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And indeed, I mean, when I was reading up, and it might have been an article that you produced, or maybe a TUI, I don't know, but indeed in Central and Eastern Europe, so there are some exceptions, I think Slovenia and Croatia, the collective bargaining covers 1/3 of the workforce. I think it's just 1/3, and there is this proposal that regime change is needed, perhaps from company sector, from the company bargaining to more of sectoral bargaining. Okay, thank you. Hold that thought. I am going to ask all of the rest of you, just because that was good. I left a little bit more time because we needed a bit more of an overview and details, but please keep your contributions concise in case we should have some questions from the floor. Now, as I said, we're going to mix up the kind of big picture overview, some of those insights with what is happening on the ground in 3 different member states. The first of those we're going to turn to Lithuania. Ozra, please forgive me if I pronounced your name wrong. I didn't get a chance to meet you to pronounce it right, but you are definitely the right young woman to tell us what's going on.
Hello, good evening. It is a big pleasure for me to participate in this panel. So in Lithuania, the transposition of the minimum wage directive was quite smooth because prior to that, Lithuania has already had a well-functioning minimum wage setting procedure, already applying 3 out of 4 of the necessary criteria. And therefore, we think that Lithuania's case can serve as a kind of a prophecy about the long-term effects of this directive. Next slide, please. So the minimum wage is approved by the government after receiving a recommendation from the Tripartite Council, which consists of social partners. And in 2017, It was a big milestone for trade unions because in the tripartite council we managed to agree upon objective rules for setting the minimum wage. The council established that the ratio of the minimum to average wage should be between 45 and 50%, and that it should be connected to the top 5 EU countries that have the highest minimum to average wage ratio. And this interesting choice was made because at the time Lithuania had one of the highest income inequalities in EU, so it made sense to take as a reference point not the EU average, but these top 5 countries to create upwards convergence. And the formula for the minimum wage is the projection of next year's gross average wage multiplied by the average ratio of these top 5 EU countries over the last 3 years. And this serves as a reference point from which social partners open the discussion, take into account all the other criteria and economic indicators, and try to reach a common decision. Next slide. And here's data on how the minimum wage has grown over the years. And as you can see, prior to 2017, the graph is pretty flat. It was growing very little, very slowly. And after 2017, the minimum wage started growing more substantially and at a faster rate. Next slide. Latest OECD data has suggested that Lithuania has been the leader in the growth of real wages since the pandemic, and we strongly believe that the growth of the minimum wage had something to do with it, because since the minimum can only be paid for unskilled labor, wages for skilled labor eventually adjust and start growing faster as well. Next slide. As for the growth of the minimum wage, Lithuania is no longer the leader, but in the 6th place among the OECD countries, which we think is also a pretty good achievement. Next slide. Research also shows that minimum wage growth has contributed to reducing the income inequality. The upper line in this graph shows the projection of what the inequality would be like without the minimum wage, and the bottom line shows actual inequality, and we can see that there is a significant gap there. Although income inequality in Lithuania is still a big issue and still higher than the EU average, we can see that at least we are getting out of this very bad situation, and we think that this positive trend will continue. And the last slide, next one. Yes, finally, I'd like to point out a few challenges that we are facing as trade unions. One is that we still didn't manage to reach the reference values set in the directive. This year, social partners didn't reach a common decision. Trade unions were fighting for a higher number that would be the 50% of the gross average wage, but the employers suggested a lower number, so the government made a compromise decision between those two. So even with this directive, negotiations for trade unions are still pretty hard. And another challenge for Lithuania will be the 80% collective bargaining coverage target, considering the fact that currently in Lithuania it is at 22.5. This is going to be a real challenge for us. So for now, that would be it from me.
Thank you. Super comprehensive, beautifully delivered. A quick question before I move on. You've got to, I don't know, sit in a wine bar or somewhere and explain to somebody who knows nothing about this very briefly why. You talked about that Lithuania has been a leader. Certainly since COVID, there's been a lot of progress, but already, you know, you had some foundations in place before the directive was introduced. But just in a few sentences, if you can, what's the ingredient? Why is Lithuania, you know, really taking this on and working hard to make it work?
Well, for us from the trade unions, we are used to always looking for something that's bad, and sometimes it's hard to admit that we're actually doing something good. So it's really hard to point to one thing. And as for the minimum wage setting procedure that was set in place in 2017, our union leader once has called it a miracle. So we are very happy that back then unions managed to negotiate that very good minimum wage formula that's been in place since then. And other than that, for me, it's really difficult to tell what other factors contributed to that.
Just one thing to chip in, which I didn't ask you, because you said the low rate. You said 22.5%, that coverage for collective bargaining. Again, in a beautiful nutshell, do you see the directive having more impact there? Do you think that's going to improve?
Yes, we've actually seen a positive shift in the attitude from the government towards collective bargaining. We've had a national collective agreement since 2018, but at the time the content of it was pretty empty and the scope of it was very narrow. It only applied to very few budgetary institutions. But in the most recent years, this started to change, and the ministry is more willing to negotiate better provisions for trade union members and to expand it in scope. And since last year, it's applicable to all public sector, which boosted collective bargaining coverage as well as trade union membership.
Okay.
So we definitely see a positive trend there. However, in the private sector, things are not really moving forward, and this will probably be our biggest headache and challenge for the future.
I think you need to bring in Nicholas Schmidt. Get him in. That's what I would say to you. Get him in. Get him at the table. Thank you so much. Hold that thought. Please don't go away. I'm going to turn directly, and I do have questions, but again, just keeping some space for those in the room. The European Trade Union Institute, Dr. Torsten Müller. So, a lot has been said. You have a hell of a lot of experience in this arena and have been advising many organizations such as those that we've spoken of, the OECD, the ILO, Eurofound, and the ETUC. What are you going to talk about?
Thanks for leaving me the choice. I think I will talk about the minimum wage directive, actually, if you ask me like that. Now, I will talk about the transposition and why it actually so far has been quite disappointing, because I think it's fair to say that the transposition so far is disappointing, and that boils down to what you said. We all celebrated the adoption, and that was really a wonderful first step, but at the time already, the unions pointed out already, okay, this is only half the way, and the actual impact of the directive depends on an ambitious implementation. So, and we don't see this ambitious transposition and implementation at the moment for two reasons. Well, first of all, we see a delayed transposition. So, I mean, Niklas pointed it out already, only 15 countries have transposed, so it's delayed. Many countries didn't meet the deadline for different reasons. I mean, either they still discuss draft legislation or they don't see any need for action. And what we also see is a minimalist transposition. And I mean, basically, I think the key example here is Germany. In mid of October, the announcement of the transposition were 8 lines, and essentially saying that the existing legislation is in line with the directive, and that was very, very disappointing. But we see this kind of minimalist approach in other countries as well. Hungary one could mention here. So I see a certain lack of political ambition here, because, I mean, if we recall, only 3 countries did not vote in favor of the adoption of the directive: Denmark, Sweden, and Hungary. All the others voted in favor, and now when push comes to shove in terms of the transposition and the implementation, I see a lack of political ambition for different reasons. I mean, obviously, the political landscape changed as well. We don't have the same government constellation anymore as we had it in 2022, and that boils down to what Gabi said, the window of opportunity. Politically, in terms of the election of certain governments, I think the window is slowly closing, but we have to open it again somehow. But I don't want to be too negative because, and that was pointed out from Eurofound here, because it does not mean that the directive does not have an impact, because we do see an impact in terms of minimum wage setting in three different ways. I mean, some countries, and we will have the example of Bulgaria here as well, some countries put the reference value into national law, turned basically the soft law, if we want to call it like that, of the directive into hard national law. Others, and Croatia would be a very good example here, take the reference values as a political guideline when they set minimum wages. They don't have it in law, but it's a political guideline. They say, okay, our updating of the minimum wage needs to follow these reference values. Other examples we have as well, political commitments we have in Latvia and Ireland as well. So a certain staged process that by 2027 or 2028 we have fulfilled the reference values. And then I'm very glad that we have the example of the Netherlands here, because in some countries the directive also served as a basis for campaigns. And I think I'm very happy always to hear the story, because the FNV in the Netherlands built a campaign to achieve 60% of the median. And I always say this is a very bold approach to have a campaign on a concept which probably 90% of the population doesn't understand what it is. So, but I mean, you added 416 euros, but still 16% of the median, and I spare you my Dutch pronunciation of your slogan, you will do it later. And I think that's great. So we see there is an impact, but that doesn't leave the governments out of their responsibility. We need an ambitious transposition of the directive and implementation. And we also need ambitious action plans to boost collective bargaining. We will come to that later, I think. I want to leave it at that.
Just to pause for a moment, and I'm happy to hear an answer also from you. You know, I mean, again, Nicolas Schmidt said the Commission has its work cut out. They need to keep an eye on this. There needs to be monitoring, reporting, but it isn't legally binding. You know, it's a political frame of reference. So Gabi at the beginning talked about, you know, there are all sorts of instruments where we also need to keep pressure. But if you had to pick one thing, I mean, you said, you know, I think there's a lack of political ambition, but from the EU dimension, the member states have their solid responsibility. What would you hope for that could be done to really push that implementation?
Well, what could be done? I think all the progressive forces in the various countries have to unite and push for an ambitious, a more ambitious implementation. And I mean, to some extent, what's not been done in terms of the transposition for collective bargaining, we can correct with the action plans to some extent. But in terms of minimum wages, I think the least one could push at national level and push the national governments to do is actually pay more attention to the reference values. Because even then, if we have 60% of the median or 50% of the average, even then, we still need to check whether this actually is a wage a worker can make a living off. I mean, because it's not, it's a very pragmatic step. It's 60-50, it's easy to communicate and it's easy to calculate, so it's a very pragmatic step. But the more ambitious step would then be also to check whether this is actually a wage set at this level, is actually a wage where a worker can make a living from. And therefore, we need the second step, the reality test, as we sometimes call it, based on a basket of goods and services to check, can we afford this basket of goods and services by our minimum wage? And if not, we have to take the second step and go from the reference values to what one might call a living wage, but at least a wage which covers the cost of this basket of goods and services.
Let me just give you a moment to also, I mean, the same question to you. What might you add?
The Commission has reporting requirements. So the Commission has to report how the implementation is done and what is the effect in the different member states. So I think it is very important. If the Commission is properly doing this job reporting, including on some methodological issues related to how we define the living standards, how the minimum wage is referred to them, how collective bargaining agreements refer to the minimum wages, I think that the picture is going to be much clearer, because we have plenty of national practices. I mean, a good reporting from the Commission, a push from the Commission to implement properly the directive is going to be very important.
Thank you. Okay, so optimistic there. Elmar, we heard some praise there from the gentleman from Torsten and a call to shouting out the slogan, but I'm not sure you're going to be quite as positive from what's happening in the Netherlands as we heard from Lithuania, and hopefully we'll hear from Bulgaria shortly. So over to you.
Yeah, it's working. Yeah, first of all, I'm glad to be back here in this premises. I've worked in the office of Agnes Jongerius, saw the negotiations, tried to improve those a bit. And when I thought that negotiating with member states was difficult in trilogue meetings, little did I know how difficult it is to actually implement such a directive into national legislation. I now work for the Dutch Trade Union Confederation, biggest trade union in the Netherlands. And indeed, we already had a long-lasting campaign to get the minimum wage on 60% of the median wage in the Netherlands. Because we think it's fair that minimum wage earners also benefit from the added wealth that we create in a country. That's why we've been calling for that 60%, which is also part of the directive. But when you see the implementation in the Netherlands, first of all, as social partners, we don't have a single clue in what way the criteria from Article 5.2 are being used. We have no idea. We know that we need to take into account the cost of living. We know that we need to take into account how productivity on the long run is developing. Our minister doesn't want to share with us how he's using the criteria, what weight he's giving to those criteria. Then, if you look at this graph which I brought along, you can see the top line, that's what the productivity has developed like since the introduction of the statutory minimum wage in the Netherlands. That was in 1969. You see the productivity has gone up, just like the commissioner said. Productivity had gone up, but minimum wage earners didn't follow. The other graph that you can see is the amount of the collective bargain wages. The graph below the productivity gains is the development of the median wage. So it's also not following the productivity, but at least it's a bit higher. And then if you see the lowest two graphs, that's the minimum wage and the youth minimum wage. What happened there? In the 1980s, the minimum wage has been cut. And in the 1990s, it has been frozen a couple of times. So minimum wage earners didn't follow the pace of the wealth of the rest of the country. Minimum wage earners relatively are becoming poorer. And we want to set this straight. And with the directive in hand, we managed to stir up people not to accept such low wages anymore. So in 2023, it was possible to get a minimum wage increase. We had a big inflation crisis, just like everywhere else in Europe, and the back then minister said, okay, we need to increase the minimum wage with 8%. You can see that increase. That's the tiny increase at the very end of the graph. You can also see what still needs to be done then. And we're still lagging behind with what minimum wage earners should be entitled to. Then, if we go to what collective bargaining is going to be improved like. The minimum wage directive says we need to strengthen collective bargaining. But in the Netherlands, we do not know protection against discrimination of workers who are being fired or who are being adversely treated on the basis of their trade union membership. The directive says that we need to have this in place, but the Netherlands is unwilling to do so. So this is something that we think the Commission should pay attention to when they're looking if the directive is correctly transposed. It's not in place, it's nowhere to be found in national legislation. So workers who are willing to, who would like to step forward to collectively bargain are being left unprotected. That's something that really needs to be changed. And then lastly, and that's on the next slide. Yeah, there you go. We have a variation in our statutory minimum wage. This is the youth wage. And like Ireland, we are the only 2 member states in the EU where you have a generic variation for, well, an age group. In our view, this is discrimination on the basis of age. And we know now with Article 6 of the directive that you need to check if variations are non-discriminatory and if they are proportional, including to have a legitimate aim. It doesn't make sense to me that someone who is doing the same job as a 20-year-old, if you're 18-year-old, that you earn 50% less than your 20-year-old colleague. In the case of Damien, he's a truck driver, he's 19 years old, so he's earning only 70% of his colleague. He's already done with his studies, so there's no reason for what the government is saying is the legitimate aim of having this variation in the first place, keeping him to school. He's done with school. He just wants to do his work for the same wage as his colleagues driving trucks. And then our government also does not want to test if the cuts that they take from the youth minimum wage, so the 30% from Damien's wage, has any effect on his livelihood, on the adequacy of his statutory minimum wage. So in that sense, they're also not fulfilling the proportionality criterion of variations. So these are things where we see that our directive is not being transposed correctly. And actually, we call upon you to stir up this problem, help these workers who you see in the picture, because they deserve equal pay for equal work. And we ask the Commission to, well, clearly look at the transposition of the Netherlands, because we think this is not in line with what the obligations of the directive ask for.
Thank you very much. And indeed, I mean, at the very beginning, we heard there from the importance of addressing the discrepancy in the gender pay gap, but you very rightly and probably does not come up enough in the public consciousness that there is this massive wage gap, and for you in the Netherlands. And also with all of these issues we have with the demographic challenge, the necessity to upskill, to meet the future, which is already here, labour market, we are not encouraging young people to feel like they want to jump in there and be a part of it. One very brief one for you, if you can be brief, a little bit similar that I asked to our colleague in Lithuania. This lack of transparency, this obfuscation, this backpedaling, to what do you put it down to? Where is this fear? Where is this unwillingness to do the right thing, or enough of the right thing?
I feel that certain interests, business interests, get way too much room to be outplayed here. I think our society would look a lot better, our social market economy in Europe would look a lot better if we do more collective bargaining, if we increase wages, if we give people purchasing power. I think that would increase not only the wealth of our entire continent, but also our competitiveness. It's a conditional sine qua non. That's what we need. That's what this directive should be working towards for. And I think that all those parties in government should finally give people what they deserve.
And so why are they not grasping it? That's a very compelling argument. I personally wouldn't disagree with it. So why is that not being seized upon and put into practice?
I think because those business interests are much too influential, at least in the parties in government in the Netherlands. It's the agriculture lobby who's in government. It's the populists who are in government. They're supported with money from VNO-NCW, our employers' organization. People should become much more furious.
Thank you. I just wanted to drill down a little bit more into the details there. Thank you. So we won't hear from Bulgaria quite yet. We're going to come to you now, Professor Dr. Sasha Garben. I joked with her. I said that when I read her CV, I felt like the ultimate intellectual couch potato. So I will let you say a little bit more about yourself before you bring your thoughts to the table on this issue of implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. I hope you will still be happy that I was here after my talk, because I am afraid I have to rain a little bit on the parade by sharing some worries about whether the miracle that we have heard will not in fact turn out to be a mirage, and that it was in fact not possible at all to adopt this directive, because something that has curiously not been mentioned a single time today is that the directive is currently before the Court of Justice. There is an annulment action by Denmark, and the court will have to decide whether or not this directive will in fact survive. So it's a rather little existential detail that we might bring into the conversation about this directive and its implementation and its successes and failures at this point. I am a little bit worried for several reasons. And I'm not sure if you will allow me to share all the reasons, so maybe as kind of cliffhangers, I will just first share a reason and then you can cut me off and then I can share another reason. But first of all, it's because the Court of Justice really is faced with a choice, because there are good legal arguments on both sides. There are good arguments on the one hand to say that this directive was validly adopted on the basis of Article 153, despite of the fact that the 5th paragraph of that article says that it does not apply to pay. Why can that then still be valid? Because the court in earlier case law had already said, just because this paragraph says that the legal basis does not apply to pay, does not mean that you cannot adopt any measures on this basis that relate to pay. And so other directives have been adopted that relate to pay. They have not been minimum wage directives. They have not been directives that have as their very rationale and at their very heart and core minimum wages. So there is an argument on the one hand that this, nevertheless, the directive as it stands does not breach that paragraph 5 because it does not directly set any minimum wages, and that it remains indirect and procedural and soft in places. And that is a valid argument to make. So maybe the court follows that. But on the other hand, as I said already, this is a directive that goes a bit further than the previous ones that had been adopted on the basis of 153 and that were upheld. So that's my first worry, is that there is good arguments on both sides. Would you like to hear my second worry?
If it can be concise, because I'd like to ask if anybody wants to come back, and then I'll get beautifully concise. Yes, please, lay it out.
My second worry is that the court will not make the choice that everybody here in this room would like it to make. Not because the court, when faced with a choice between the social and the economic, very often chooses the economic over the social, as we know it does, but that's not the situation here. It doesn't have to choose social or economic interests. In this case, it chooses more Europe versus less Europe, and usually that's a safe bet. The court will choose more Europe. It is very, very, very rare that the court will annul a piece of legislation. So why am I worried? Because of the context. And the context is as follows, and I'm very sorry, moderator, I'm bringing you back to the 90s. One time where the court previously annulled a directive was in the 90s, the Tobacco Advertisement Directive. It was a directive fighting tobacco advertisement in the name of public health, but it was adopted on the basis of an internal market legal basis because of an exclusion of competence under the public health legal basis. And the court said no and annulled the directive. And it did so in the context of an increasingly anxious political environment with member states very afraid about competence creep. And especially a judgment from the German Constitutional Court, the Maastricht Urteil, that called into question European integration and the authority of the Court of Justice. Yes, I'll speed up. You know that we've had similarly fraught relationships recently between the German Constitutional Court with PSPP and the Court of Justice, and some other national apex court challenging the authority of the court. And so the court might be willing to give something to those critics and to sacrifice a directive to show that it takes the limits of EU authority very seriously so as to protect its own final authority in the end. So that's why I'm worried. If you want to hear why I have hope, you have to.
It's got to be 30 seconds,
No,
please,
fine,
because I would like to leave some
Later on-
space.
later on.
Okay, but I just wanted to invite, if anybody from the floor wants to chip in on that, or Torsten, you wanted to chip in. Sorry, I'll just do that, if I may. Let me just take, yeah.
I hear you, Sasha, but at the same time, I'm a little bit more relaxed. It's the job of the lawyers actually to find the hair in the soup and to point out potential dangers here. So I'm very happy that you actually point out the dangers. At the hearing of the court, the issue was more, as far as I can see, partial annulment now, the collective bargaining, article on collective bargaining, which from a union point of view obviously is the core thing. But I'm still quite relaxed about this because I think the Commission did a very good job in testing the limits and going as far as they really could without endangering the constitutional basis. But of course, now we will have clarity by the court. But the point I actually want to make is here, that's why I think it's so important that we make it a political issue and that why we should push for an ambitious transposition already, because I think once we have it in law, governments will be very reluctant to push back and retreat what they have in law already. And that's why I think an ambitious transposition at this point of time or fairly soon is so important, also for legal reasons, to avoid the legal unclarities.
All right, you wanted to chip in here.
Yeah, I mean, Sasha, you brought, your first argument is a very legalistic argument. Your second argument is totally the opposite, a very political argument. I mean, how the court would behave. Also, the example with the tobacco directive shows that once you have a momentum, and I think that the directive created a momentum, and this is what I was trying to say. I mean, at national level, you already see, certainly not the full implication, all the results that we want to see, but we see a clear reaction on national basis. So this momentum can be helped. And I would go away from the legalistic arguments here, because law is in order to create instruments to solve some social expectations and requirements. So I would be more on the positive side here.
Yeah, I'm also quite confident that we'll keep this directive. Also because I know my government in the Netherlands, and they would fling whatever they could at me in order to prevent from having to implement this correctly. And they did not bring up this argument at all. The Netherlands is at least pretending to implement everything. I know that during the discussions, this discussion was hovering all over the trilogue negotiations. We had those discussions with the legal services of the European Parliament, with the legal services of the European Council, with the services of the Commission. And as long as we stayed on wage setting, which the directive does entirely, also in Article 4, it's within the scope of the legal base. That's what we've done. So I say, let's get it implemented, let's get it done.
Can I ask you to hold that thought for a minute? Because what I'm going to do is hear from Bulgaria. You've been waiting very patiently. And of course, we heard again that, you have put reference values into national law. So we are actually going to hear a kind of a different case here from the ground. And then I'm going to see if there's just 2 or 3 general questions or comments from the floor, but also, of course, give you a chance to come back on that you heard. And you said you also want to say where you have hope, but perhaps also taking into account what your fellow panelists said. So let us turn to you, Rosica. Thank you so much for your patience. Tell us in no more than 4 or 5 minutes, please, what's going on in Bulgaria? Well, yeah, I mean, specific to this topic on the table, not in general, of course, let me clarify. Don't do a Torsten. Thank you.
Okay, hello, colleagues. First of all, I would like to say that I'm here to speak on behalf of Mr. Luboslav Kostov, who was not able to attend today due to some health problems. Anyway, Mr. Luboslav Kostov represents the Confederation of Independent Trade Unions in Bulgaria. I'm part of his political team, and we are very much involved in the whole transposition process of this directive in Bulgaria. What I will say, yes, we are about to apply this directive, but it is important to make most of it. Because currently we have, yes, you have previously cited us as a good example, because we have now this automatic indexation formula fixing the minimum wage to 50% of the average. But this formula is very much challenged by the employers' organizations here in the country, and actually is subject now to a court ruling and the decision whether we should keep this mechanism. In terms of the directive, in Bulgaria, huge debates are ongoing, and we as trade unions shall really burst many myths related to the minimum wage increase. Because, as you know, we observe one of the highest minimum wage increases all over Europe, but currently there are many myths that are spreading within the society that this shall not be anymore observed. We as trade unions say that minimum wage increase is actually not against the competitiveness of the local firms. Also, we are saying that it does not affect at any point or anyhow the employment and the unemployment rates, because unemployment is at a record low rate, and the employment is in a record high rate actually. And actually what we observe that the employment rate of low-skilled workers is also going up in Bulgaria despite the minimum wage increase. Just to say that in Bulgaria we have a tripartite group established within the Ministry of Labor, which shall be dealing with the transposition of this directive, but unfortunately due to the political instability of the country. Because during the last 2 years we had government elections happening every several months. And actually once a new labor minister was appointed, he or she came into power with a new political cabinet, and no matter what progress we have managed to achieve within this tripartite group actually was abolished. I will say right now that we are at the middle of nothing in terms of transposition. We have neither agreed a transparent mechanism for determining the minimum wage, nor we have accepted any legal provisions or amendments that will defend the collective bargaining and the higher coverage rate of the collective agreements. What we as unions will have been insisting on during the whole transposition process was that the minimum wage and the reference value of testing its adequacy shall be the living wage. Actually, trade unions are the only ones that speak about the cost of living, that the cost of living is actually part of the directive's articles. And we will never stop to insist that the minimum wage shall be set at a rate that covers the cost of living or shall be equal to the living wage. And I should point that at the beginning of this year, ILO has adopted a tripartite agreed definition of the living wage. And we will now have further arguments why in Bulgaria we need the living wage, why it shall be calculated by the National Statistical Institute, not by the trade unions, because unions are the only actors in Bulgaria doing these calculations so far. And this is something that we will really insist on in the upcoming months, because the work on the transposition, unfortunately, has started from the beginning once again. Thank you.
So very challenging, and you have your work cut out. I mean, when you talk there about, just clarify briefly, you said that there was a lot of misinformation out there, a lot, which was causing difficulties. So just clarify that for me.
Yeah, actually, this information is coming mostly from the employer side. I will say again, the main critics was that having higher minimum wage actually leads to unemployment. But if you look at the unemployment figures, there is no argument saying that minimum wage destroys jobs. Actually, the last data by the National Statistical Institute says that the minimum wage earners have gone down in numbers. This means that having even higher minimum wage does not apply that many workers will be employed under this minimum wage or will become minimum wage earners. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So a mixed bag there, progress and then back steps, and then it's in your voice, it sounds like you're like, okay, I'm ready. I mean, we heard from Gabby at the beginning, it's a political battle, and that you have got that battle to come. I mean, are you hopeful?
Yeah. I'm listening. Sorry
Said,
for my reactions, but
are you
I'm
hopeful?
supporting.
Are you hopeful? That was my last word. Are you hopeful that progress can be made?
We are.
Thank you so much. Let me just take some breathing space because I need to close this panel in about 7 or 8 minutes. And, you know, you've done a lot of listening with no moving. Is there any comment, briefly, slogan length from the floor? Slogan length, Morse code. Do say who you are. Thank you.
I'm MEP from Greece. My name is Maria Zacharia. And I also am an active trade unions for the last 21 years in Greece, representing private sector employees in Greece. In my view, the minimum wage is necessary, but does not address the core issues of the labor market. This is because there are countries where skilled workers are paid the minimum wage, instead of it being reserved exclusively for unskilled workers. In Greece, from February 2012 to December 2023, it was forbidden to count workers' previous experience and skills. For 11 years, skilled employees were paid the same as unskilled workers. Flexible work arrangement also increased during this time. As a result, many workers now work fewer than 40 hours per week, earning less than the minimum set by the directive. Those who do find full-time jobs are often forced to work an 11-hour, 6 days as per the law schedule, but are paid for a 5-day, 8-hour week. The right-wing government has eliminated free collective bargaining from 2012 to the present. Currently, only 27% of workers are covered by sectoral or occupational collective agreements, while the remaining 73% are covered by the National Collective Agreement, which provides only the minimum wage. This minimum wage is
Sorry, can I just
determined-
ask you to close off just that impression from your
Yes, okay.
country,
I
if
will
I may?
complete
Thank you.
my,
Sorry,
phrase.
thank you.
This is minimum wage is determined solely by the Minister of Labour under the current law and is then legislated without any negotiation process. The question is, can all these conditions coexist and can we realistically hope that the indicators ranking Greece as the second poorest country in the Eurozone will improve? Thank you.
Thank you. There is a question or comment from the floor here.
Thanks very much. My name's Esther Lynch. I'm the General Secretary of the ETUC. And I'm going to have a chance to speak in a few minutes, but I really wanted within this panel, because I know people are listening online, to give them every assurance that this directive is legally sound. First off, it's not possible to lift up the directive and to determine what pay will be. You can't lift it up and say, the minimum wage in Germany will be this amount, or the minimum wage in Ireland will be that amount. So it doesn't set pay. It does not set pay. The second point, which is that collective bargaining is a responsibility of not only every member state, because it's a member of the International Labour Organization, and because the fundamental conventions require that, but also the EU itself must treat the European Convention on Human Rights to be as important as the EU treaties. So again, the court cannot find against this directive on that basis either. So I want to assure everybody and every member state, this is the most legally challenged directive in its passage. The Parliament, the Commission and the Council, 3 separate legal services all confirmed it was legally sound. So I'm disappointed to be back here. It's like Groundhog Day, yet again, discussing whether this is legally sound directive. It is. Workers are entitled to the pay rise. Workers are entitled to join the union without fear and have the ability to collectively bargain. And it would be a catastrophe, because I know this has been heard online, it would be a catastrophe if the court was to find against the right to collective bargaining and set itself on a collision course with the European trade union movement.
Thank you. We'll come to you in a minute, and Gabby, over to you first.
Yes. And I think that was from the beginning. We had these debates when we discussed this directive. We had all the legal assessments, and this is why I can encourage everyone to read it. Because it is drafted in a way that is legally quite clever. And I'm also a member of the AFCO committee, and I know a lot about the problems of certain national courts and the European Court of Justice that has nothing to do with this here. It's a separate thing to debate. But this is why I think we should ask ourselves why it is challenged so much. Because they are afraid of it. And they will see that it will bring change if we stick to it and really be the watchdogs of this implementation. And I think this is what we are going to do, because also we know why we did fight so hard for this directive and while it can make a difference. It doesn't solve all problems of the world. And and I'm sure it's the same for Agnes, if we would have the freedom to do this directive, it would be even much harder and different. But this is the directive that was possible. And also, so I think whatever the court will be, it's not our job, you know, I don't know how you say it in English, that you read out of the coffee substance something. We will humbly await whatever the court will decide. But I'm also quite positive here because of the legal work I know that was done before. But I think it should give us encouragement also that people really took this route to take and challenge it. We don't have that very often, but I tell you something, this will be something, this will increase with the majorities that we have and where we have to be prepared that the ones that don't want social Europe, the ones that want to do it all nationally alone, They are getting stronger and they will challenge more and more what we are doing here. And we have to be prepared for this. Thank you.
Thank you. How will we just play out the last few minutes? First of all, I'd like to give you a chance to just say, but again, because we're running into time for our second panel, let me give you a reminder that we're stopping at 5:45, not at 6:15. I don't know if anybody wants to chip in after that. We'll close off this on, you know, we heard there, Greece, there's a lot happening today, yesterday in Greece, that, okay, we have this directive, but there's all sorts of other things going on in the labour market. It's a very tricky situation. I don't know if either of you want to chip in or respond. That was also very much of a kind of a comment and an insight, but if there is anything that you might want to say, I don't know. Let's come to that first, and then I will come to you. Thank you, Sasha. Sorry, I'm being a bad moderator. Let's come to Sasha first, because we had that conversation. No, my bad. And then I will ask you to come back on our participant from Greece. Thank you. Last word for you.
I don't think I disagree at all. I was outlining the fact that I'm a little bit worried because I don't trust the court completely with this. That doesn't mean that I don't think myself that the directive could have been adopted on this basis. I have argued that it could. I've also said it would have been maybe better to choose another legal basis because that would have allowed you to do even more, but then fine. I've said that I think the directive can and should be upheld. But I'm just saying, and to no mean intent, that I do think we need to take into account it is not entirely impossible that something comes out of Luxembourg that all of us don't like. And so then, as a contingency, I was going to say, the smartest thing to do is get as much as you can international law already, because then it doesn't matter as much whether or not the directive stands or falls at European level. So all the more important to keep this fight that you're already fighting going. So it's meant to motivate and not to anger, but well.
Okay, so I think those of you in the room are very, very positive. Thank you, Esther, for standing up. And actually, I did not register. That's my bad. Hello to the online audience. I didn't even wish you hello. That you said this was one of the most contested. A tremendous amount of thought has gone into it. We also heard, let me remind us, from Elmar there, you said of all of the stuff that was coming back hard-hitting from your government, that wasn't one of the issues that was there on the table. So you feel positive about that. So we do want to leave this room in the spirit. And of course, I think, Torsten, you said, well, it's exactly that. Let's build on this momentum, this wind of change. Let's get it into national law. Let's keep that conversation going just in case. But I think the prevailing thoughts in the room are, this is going to happen. And let's leave that for a moment. Let's come back and give a last word in answer to our participant from Greece. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. The directive is a fact of life. And as any other legal document, I think the focus should be on the implementation rather than waiting and seeing if anybody would have something different on that. The situation in Greece is very particular in Europe, and you're absolutely right. Greece is the country where I mentioned that we are measuring the difficulty of the workers on minimum wage to make ends meet. And Greece is by record highest in Europe. 90% of the Greek workers on minimum wage declare that they cannot pay their living with the minimum wage. And this is way above any other level in Europe. So in Greece, there is a particular problem. I don't say that this wouldn't be a problem in other countries that has to be solved. And I think that this type of legislation is going to help very much on that. And the minimum wage, the idea is not to flatten the wage scale, but this is rather to push the whole wage scale towards a better living standard. That's why you have this second strand of not only fair distribution, but also standard of living, which is extremely important on that. So again, I would look at the answers of this in the proper implementation, or this is the way to go. Of course, that's a national decision how to implement it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any last half-sentence word or even a full-sentence word from any of you? I mean, we are looking at the implementation. You've given some very clear calls. I mean, yours was you were saying, please, look, I want the Commission, please keep an eye on what's going on. Any last words, takeaways for our audience? Torsten, and we'll start with you. Beautifully short.
Very short, because I think Rosica was very modest in Bulgaria, because you have a very good rule introduced supporting collective bargaining, because you have now a rule that makes it a criminal offense if an employer obstructs collective bargaining and unionization efforts. And I think that is also a very good way forward and sets an example for other countries.
Shall we come to you? Anything you would like to say, Rosica, as before we let you go offline? Yes, last word.
Yeah, thank you, Torsten, for mentioning that we have this amendment within our legislation that actually aims to put some sanctions over the employers who actually discriminate workers in terms of being a member of a trade union. And this sanction can actually be either a money sanction, but also a prison sanction. So yes, this is a very positive step towards having more trade unions established on very company level. But however, I shall say that we still insist on many more legal amendments. And I will only say here that civil servants do not have the right to bargain. They cannot actually conclude collective agreements. And this is something very problematic in our point of view. Also, we have some strike restrictions as well. Also, in terms of bargaining, once the bargaining process has started, there's no time framework for it to end, to produce a collective agreement. So the collective bargaining cycle can last for years, for instance.
Okay.
And these are, yes, many things that we still insist on to have a greater coverage rate of the collective bargaining.
Thank you. Thank you. Last word from Elmar. Go.
Yes, indeed. A rehearsal that we indeed like the Commission to look closely on the transposition of the Dutch directive. But I'd like to start with something end with something optimistic. Like Torsten said, it is Dutch workers claiming an EU directive and saying we have a right to a decent wage and it should be set in an adequate way. They are looking upon the EU to make that happen. We have young workers saying our youth wage is not in line with the EU directives. This is workers saying we are getting rights from Europe. Europe is making sure that our lives is becoming better, and we're going to claim them. And that's what we need a lot more. We need a social Europe. We need new legislative proposals on the stronger social Europe. We need protection against AI on the workplace. We need public procurement to work for workers. This is what we need, and I encourage all the people in this room to fight for that.
Again, just a couple of last few sentences from you, Ozra. You've been listening to a lot. Anything further you'd want to say about what's happening or anything that you would take away from your fellow panelists?
Just to save time for the next panel, I'd like to say that for countries such as Lithuania that have a very low collective bargaining coverage and low union membership, these clear rules on the minimum wage and being able to participate in these negotiations is a very important tool that we have to not only help out those who make the least, but also the whole middle class. So this is very important to us, and we are happy that we have this tool.
Thank you. Sasha, last word, and then to you, and I will close.
No, just, keep fighting the good fight.
You get the prize for the shortest last word at any event I've ever moderated. Thank you. And positive ones at that. Over to you, Ivailo.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I mean, the road is ahead of us. There is already some movement. We are going to continue watching what is happening, and we'll be happy to support all stakeholders that are interested in the developments to watch how further this process of implementation goes. Thank you.
Thank you. And as always, what I pick up is, God forbid, I mean, all of the things that aren't happening, not happening fast enough, people backpedaling, lack of transparency, that passion from those social partners, that absolute, hey, we are sticking with this. This is a good thing. It's really a beacon. And it's already shown that people are looking at that, and there's been some movements because of that directive. So you are certainly, as you say, fight the good fight, not going to give up. And I feel a great sense of positivity after this, and that there is, as you said, the Commission has its job, but that's what it needs to do. Look at the reports coming in, look closely, see what's going on in the Netherlands and elsewhere, and keep a very, very close eye. So thank you very much. Can we give some warm thanks to the two ladies online and to the four speakers here? Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to play a little bit of musical chairs. We have four speakers in our second panel. So are you all good? Does anybody need to stand up? Go to the loo, take a coffee, sing a song, do a Mexican wave. Does anybody need to do anything in this room to just make sure you are still with us, to honor the last four brains that we've got on this panel? And they are very important ones. Come, yes. Oh, you're going to use my encouragement. You're rushing out the room. But you're so important. Make sure you come back. Okay, bring coffee for the troops up here. And you. Very nice to meet you. Thank you.
So,
Hello.
very pleased to meet you, Estelle, but I have to leave
Yes,
in 40
you might
minutes.
not be able to say all you
So
have
maybe
on your I think stuff you're saying on the definition of. All right. Okay. So that's all right. We've got even before these good people. Do you have a name? Do you even have a name there? No, you do not.
Oliver.
So you can see the lineup. Does everybody know these good people in this second panel? Put your hands up if you are very familiar with the speakers. Ah, no. Okay.
No, Oliver.
Everyone knows Agnes. Everyone knows Agnes.
Does everybody know Agnes Jongerius? Who's the? All right. Shh, because the interpreters' ears are probably exploding. I'm chatting away and letting everybody else chat away, which is not, I'm not doing a good job. So we have Agnes here, Jongerius, who is former S&D employment coordinator, but most importantly, co-rapporteur of the directive on adequate minimum wages. And for you to know, former chair of the Dutch Trade Union Confederation, the FNV, and we heard from Elmar there from 2005 to 2012. We also have, you've already heard her speak, Esther Lynch from the European Trade Union Confederation. She's the General Secretary, so a real expert in social dialogue, collective bargaining, wage policy, gender equality, but also extensive experience at national and international as well as EU level. We have Oliver Röpke, who is President of the European Economic and Social Committee, also former president of the EESC Workers Group and rapporteur of EESC resolutions and opinions on employment and social policy in the single market and innovation. So, of course, very well qualified to be on the second panel. And here on my right, and you're with us for 40 minutes, so I'm mindful of that, we have MEP Estelle Keulemans. S&D Employment Coordinator, but also from 2016 until this year, the Director of the Trade Union Services, and then Secretary General of the General Belgian Trade Union Confederation in Brussels. So this is all about fair wages and collective bargaining as a prerequisite for a competitive Europe. Now, I know you're going to say something about the definition of competitiveness, so I sort of feel I ought to start with Estelle, but or should I start with you because you're kind of?
Start with Estelle.
Can I?
Yes,
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's very good point that you make, and it's very important because you talk about the word competitiveness being ubiquitous, and it needs some thought to unpack it.
Thank you very much. I will speak in French if it doesn't matter, so I invite you to, if you don't understand French, it would be easier for me. Donc, voilà, ici, effectivement, d'abord, remercier à nouveau Nicolas, qui n'est malheureusement plus dans la salle, mais donc, parce qu'effectivement, cette directive sur le salaire minimum, elle est essentielle, même si on voit que dans sa mise en œuvre, ça reste effectivement extrêmement compliqué. Et ça rappelait aussi un peu quelle est son origine. C'est notamment le fait qu'après les crises de 2008 et autres, on se rend compte que l'Europe sociale est méchamment en panne. Et d'ailleurs, c'est sous sa précédente mandature qu'on décide d'adopter un socle européen des droits sociaux et puis de mettre dans la lettre de mission de Nicolas, mais j'y reviendrai. Et c'est pas parce que c'est dans une lettre de mission qu'on y arrive et puis qu'on arrive à faire voter tout le monde, y compris le Conseil, là-dessus. Voilà, donc pourquoi? Mais parce que soudain, on se rend compte qu'il y a notamment des travailleurs pauvres et de plus en plus de travailleurs pauvres au niveau de l'Europe. Et on se dit que c'est quand même un gros problème. Et puis, voilà, et je vais revenir justement par rapport au défi d'avoir, au-delà de cette directive sur le salaire minimum, qui est évidemment essentielle, mais comme on dit aussi, même quand on a un bon texte, rien ne vaut une bonne transposition des textes. Et on sent l'enjeu qu'il existe encore derrière cette transposition. Et on verra comment la Commission va évaluer cette transposition et quelles seront les réponses, justement, aux absences et aux manques dans cette transposition dans certains États membres. Mais voilà, la question qui m'est posée aujourd'hui, je voyais effectivement, je voulais y revenir, c'était effectivement la question du rôle des salaires et de la concertation sociale comme prérequis par rapport à la compétitivité. Et comme ça a été dit, comme vous venez de le dire, effectivement, aujourd'hui, on a une nouvelle Bible, au niveau européen, et effectivement, ça se retrouve d'ailleurs dans toutes les lettres de mission des différents commissaires, c'est ce fameux rapport Draghi qui met en exergue les pertes de compétitivité au niveau européen et qui fait toute une série de propositions. Alors derrière ce terme compétitivité, qu'est-ce qu'on retrouve ? Il y a eu d'ailleurs un sommet européen récemment, et d'ailleurs même M. Orban lui-même disait, mais finalement entre leaders des différents gouvernements des États membres, sur la question de la compétitivité, ça a été très vite parce que finalement c'est une question très pragmatique. Ah bon ? C'est une question très pragmatique. Or, le rapport Draghi lui-même ne définit pas ce qu'est la compétitivité. Et c'est vrai qu'on l'aperçoit souvent comme étant garantir en tout cas des parts de marché, qu'on continue à avoir des bonnes parts de marché, des politiques notamment à l'exportation, alors que ce soit d'ailleurs au sein de l'Union européenne et puis hors Union européenne. Mais malheureusement, effectivement, la notion de compétitivité, telle qu'elle est perçue, est souvent résumée à ce qu'on appelle la compétitivité coût. C'est-à-dire, pour les entreprises, avoir en tout cas, pour maintenir la compétitivité, c'est de ne pas avoir des coûts de l'énergie, des coûts des matières premières, et puis évidemment, c'est celui qui nous intéresse le plus ici, les coûts salariaux trop importants par rapport aux pays voisins. Nous, en Belgique, on connaît ça malheureusement très bien, puisque c'est notamment suite à l'entrée en tout cas de la Belgique, mais de l'ensemble des États membres dans l'euro, donc la mise en œuvre de l'euro, qu'on a vu adopter chez nous une loi sur la prévention de la compétitivité et de l'emploi, qui a surtout comme objectif, effectivement, de brider nos salaires, de brider la négociation des salaires et d'empêcher une véritable négociation des salaires. On est d'ailleurs en recours devant l'Organisation internationale du travail, puisque ça fait de nombreuses années que la possibilité d'évolution des salaires au-dessus de ce qu'on appelle l'indexation, puisqu'on a encore cette chance d'avoir un mécanisme d'indexation automatique des salaires en Belgique, comme ça existe au Luxembourg, mais au-dessus, la norme salariale pour évoluer, c'est zéro, et donc nos salaires n'évoluent plus, effectivement, on n'a même plus la possibilité de les négocier correctement. Et donc, voilà, le problème, c'est que ce rapport Draghi, et même s'il ne donne pas la définition, effectivement, de ce qu'est la compétitivité, malheureusement, on craint que, à nouveau, le dogme de cette compétitivité, mais donc entendu uniquement par rapport à la compétitivité sur les coûts, la baisse des coûts, donc avoir une énergie qui est abordable pour les entreprises, et puis des coûts salariaux qui ne seraient pas trop importants, ce dogme-là revienne. Or, la compétitivité, elle a aussi une autre définition, c'est la compétitivité hors coût. Et c'est notamment l'investissement que les entreprises doivent faire dans l'innovation, c'est-à-dire pour effectivement être compétitifs. Et ça, on l'oublie. Et c'est certainement, je pense, parce que moi je ne veux pas jeter la pierre à M. Draghi, je pense que c'est aussi en grosse partie ce qui se retrouve dans son rapport. Il dit qu'il est nécessaire justement d'avoir une Europe qui réinvestit dans l'innovation et autres. Mais malheureusement, je crains que et la Commission et certainement demain, cette compétitivité soit réduite de manière dogmatique uniquement la compétitivité coût et que même si on a, et heureusement qu'on l'a, cette directive sur les salaires minimums, demain, on risque d'avoir des mesures, notamment dans le cadre du semestre européen, notamment dans le cadre de réformes structurelles qui risquent d'être demandées aux États membres. On risque de revoir venir la question qu'il va falloir à nouveau brider l'évolution des salaires. Et ça, voilà, donc ça, c'est un des grands risques. Et risque contre lequel, moi, j'ai entendu effectivement ce qui a été dit par le représentant de l'ETUI ici. Nous avons la responsabilité vraiment de lutter. Parce que, voilà, on nous pose la question, effectivement, donc quels sont l'enjeu de la compétitivité, mais d'avoir des salaires justes, adéquats, par rapport aux défis actuels au niveau européen. Eh bien, oui, voilà, je vais peut-être y revenir, je suis désolée, mais donc, quel est un des gros problèmes des secteurs industriels et autres aujourd'hui? C'est ce qu'on appelle les pénuries. Et les pénuries d'emplois. Donc on sait effectivement, et ce n'est pas uniquement dans des secteurs du care, enfin du soin comme on dit, ce n'est pas uniquement dans des secteurs comme l'enseignement, c'est aussi dans des secteurs industriels importants, dans des secteurs essentiels, on a des pénuries d'emplois. Et pour répondre à ces... Enfin, et pourquoi a-t-on des pénuries d'emplois? C'est tout simplement parce que les conditions de travail, mais aussi les conditions de rémunération qui sont offertes aux travailleurs font en sorte que ces emplois ne sont pas suffisamment attractifs. Or, la seule manière de lutter contre les pénuries d'emplois, eh bien, ce sera d'améliorer les conditions de travail d'une part, mais ce sera aussi de réévaluer les salaires. Et Nicolas l'a dit tout à l'heure, il y a un lien aussi direct et étroit entre productivité. Donc, si vraiment les entreprises veulent aussi être compétitives, il faut aussi augmenter la productivité. Et pour ça, il faut assurer de bons salaires. Et donc, voilà. Donc, si on regarde d'ailleurs la lettre de mission, c'était ça qui était important, de Nicolas Schmitt, à l'époque, et puis celle de Mme Minzatou. Et c'est vrai qu'à l'époque, M. Nicolas Schmitt avait le fait qu'il fallait avoir des rémunérations équitables et assurer que les salaires minimums soient suffisants pour garantir un niveau de vie décent. Et puis, il y avait la prévention de la pauvreté au travail. Et c'est vrai qu'il nous manque des initiatives législatives. Ça a été dit ici dans la lettre de mission de Mme Minzatou, mais on sait qu'on comptera sur elle et elle pourra compter sur nous pour remettre en avant justement le fait d'avoir des initiatives importantes. Je viens de le dire sur la question de l'emploi de qualité, où devront se retrouver la question des conditions de travail, mais aussi des rémunérations, et des rémunérations adéquates, même si ce n'est pas dans la lettre de mission. Mais donc, voilà, tous ces enjeux-là, parce que les salaires, M. Schmitt l'a dit, les salaires, ils ne sont pas l'ennemi de l'économie, et c'est ce qu'on oublie souvent. La demande intérieure, elle n'est soutenue aussi que par de bons salaires. Les enjeux d'avoir des salaires aussi corrects, c'est évidemment aussi la répartition. Voilà, je vais arrêter. On pourra revenir tout à l'heure, mais voilà.
No problem.
Désolée, mais il y a beaucoup de choses aussi sur ces différents aspects.
No, you're absolutely right. I will bring you back in. It's just then they can kind of mulch on and cogitate on those comments, which were a huge amount. And I think to hear you say, we are afraid that this dogma is going to come back, that we are talking about competition in this very narrow way that comes down to, the costs for employers. It isn't wider. And of course, for a resilient Europe and a fair and a just Europe, this issue of productivity, we heard it from Elmar, everyone should be benefiting from this shared wealth. But if competitiveness is so often linked with resilience, how on earth can we expect to make sure it stays in place if we don't have resilient workers? So what do you think of all of that? Let me come to you, Agnes. This is so much your baby. Perhaps to come respond to a couple of the points made there, and then I just give you the floor.
I'm not going to claim the motherhood of this baby, because I think it would be fair to say that there is a collective of fathers and mothers of this directive. And for me, and that's perhaps then coming back to what Estelle is saying, for me it all started after the banking crisis, when at that moment, from the European Union, member states got quite detailed recipes about policies to trim down their welfare states, but also to lower their minimum wages and to get rid of sectoral collective bargaining. And there was at that moment one prime minister, and I think he's the one who's getting a new job somewhere in the European arena. Antonia Costa said, I'm not going to say fuck you, but basically that was his message. I'm not going to follow this recipe book. I'm going to use a other way to get out of the crisis. I'm going to give my workers a decent income. I will keep the minimum wage. I will increase the minimum wage. And he could show much better economic results than the recipe book seen in Greece or in Ireland. And I think the second thing which is important to mention, and in the 10 years I've been working here in the European Parliament, no, not 10 years, because the booklet is from 2017, but I think this booklet, I really recommend that everyone who wants to do something on social policy has this in his or her pocket. Because this is in a way, in 20 principles, guaranteeing European workers, European citizens, a decent life. So the results from Antonia Costa, the European Pillar of Social Rights, 2017, with a signature of Council, of Commission and of Parliament, and with the support of social partners, is in a way a guiding principle since then. And Ilvan, you were saying the directive is a miracle. I think that's not the way to describe it. It has been the results of campaigning, repeating the European pillar. I used to say ad nauseam, which is till you get nauseous of it, repeating it all of that. But we were able to get it also in other pieces of legislation. So if you want to have my message, of course, I see the new political composition of the Parliament, of the Council. And I see a massive attack from employers and from the right wing. Perhaps you can also say, okay, for 10 years we've done enough on social policies. Now it's time to get back to business as usual. But with this European Pillar of Social Rights, that cannot happen. And I think for all the colleagues and for the trade union movement, for me, this would be my main message. Keep complaining, keeping this booklet as your guiding principles. And yes, making a directive is taking a lot of work. It's also showing the need of having good friends, because I could not have done this without my friend in the European People's Party, Dennis Radke. And I could not have done this without my friends in the trade union movement. But then, while repeating and repeating and repeating ad nauseam your message, perhaps you will not become the most popular MEP, but you can do something good for people.
But you might become the most respected MEP. And then we get into that whole debate. Would you rather be popular or respected? So thank you very much. I have lots...
I'd rather have results than a good image in the outside world.
If I may, I will come to you, Esther. I have some questions that I specifically want to ask on this link, this coming back to the title as a prerequisite for a competitive Europe. You know, this notion that wages and collective bargaining are going to achieve the reverse, the dogma we hear. You talked about the attack from employers and the right wing. So we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a moment. But Esther, let me just sort of say, lay out your stall, first of all.
So it's good to be with everybody. It feels a bit like getting the band back together. And I was wondering what song it would be, and I thought maybe we work from 9 to 5. What a way to make a living. Or maybe she works hard for the money, because that's a song about somebody trying to get by on tips. And it just really demonstrates that in working people, in the music they listen to, in the culture that they operate in, all too often injustice and the fact that it's low pay and the unjust circumstances that workers have to work under. It's a cry, a call out for justice. And it's a call out for justice to the trade union movement, but it's also a call out for justice from our parliamentarians. And to begin by saying thank you. Thanks for staying with us. Thanks for working with us. Thanks for delivering on this directive, because every euro in the hands of somebody who's on minimum wage counts. I know, I've been a minimum wage worker. Really, really tough. Being able to have that extra euro is so important. And it's difficult because we want to celebrate that win, but at the same time we know people are still struggling to get by, struggling to put food on the table, struggling to pay the rent. So it's that very difficult sort of judgment call between, saying we have a significant win, but still not enough. And how do we get enough for working people? By collective bargaining, by bargaining for our fair share of the profits that we're creating. And that's why Article 4 is so important. And there are 3 things that I really want to draw attention to. And the first is to really thank my colleague Isabel Schumann for all of the work that she has done with Giovanni, who's also here, to make sure that the guidelines on the transposition are very clear about 3 things. The first of those is that the member states are required to reach 80% of the workers covered by a collective agreement. And by a collective agreement, what the directive says very clearly is it's a collective agreement with a trade union. Because what we've started to notice now, whether it's in America with Elon Musk or whether it's even now in Luxembourg with the government there, we're all too often they're saying, well, okay, we'll reach the 80%, but by something other than unions. We'll have agreements, something done by HR maybe, or something done by some other organization. But the directive is crystal clear. It's a prerogative of trade unions to collectively bargain, and only those agreements can be counted towards the 80%. The second point then I want to make is that there's an obligation on member states to put in place an environment that supports unions to be able to meet with workers to discuss collective bargaining. And in the recitals which say, how do you do that? It's very clear that trade unions must be able to meet with workers, whether it's access online through the digital notice boards or whether it's access to the workplace, and also to get information relevant so that you can have good faith, equal bargaining on both sides. And I fear that that piece hasn't been properly picked up in member states. I feel that there is not enough attention being given to help workers organise workers so that they can effectively undertake the collective bargaining. And then the third point I want to make, and I'm very happy to see David here from Uni Europa, is that the directive is very clear that public procurement rules must not operate in a way that those companies that do recognise the right of the workers to have a collective agreement are undercut and put out of the tender process because they're more expensive, because they recognise the workers' right to a fair wage and decent conditions. It's an outrage that member states go for the cheapest option, and all too often that's what they do. So that's the third thing, to use the transposition as an opportunity to put in place a robust, clear guideline for tendering authorities that the companies that have a collective agreement must no longer be disadvantaged. And then finally, just to back up exactly what Agnes says about the importance of having an EU directive that does all of this. When the Troika showed up in Ireland, they did 2 things. They put the minimum wage back by €1 an hour. €1. And the second thing they did was they get rid of the sector agreements which gave protection for people working in hospitality, so they'd get 50 cents extra an hour for working overtime on a Sunday. That's what they did. But this directive is a shield now. It will make sure they can never force a member state to do that again. And that's another reason why it's so important to protect this directive at European level. Yes, we need action at member state level, but also we need to protect it at European level as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to pop in on one issue there, you said, you know, you've got all of these different actors. You cited, you know, different companies, Elon Musk, who are sort of, well, it's not actually that quality, those real trade unions there. You've got yellow unions, you've got other actors. Do you feel that the directive has the power to mitigate that happening? I mean, what does it mean for the directive that you see a rise in this?
So the directive is crystal clear in the definition, because in fairness, everybody who was along for the journey, remember we had lots of discussions about that there were all sorts of attempts to have lots of other actors identified as being bargaining agents. And so the directive is very clear. It says that there's that the prerogative of the trade unions to do this must be respected, and it simply says that it's a bargaining between employers on one hand and one or more trade unions on the other. No other actors are foreseen or permitted or can be part of collective bargaining within Europe, and that's entirely consistent with international labour organisation, the fundamental convention, so a fundamental human rights approach recognises that it's trade unions, and also the European Convention on Human Rights, the European Social Charter. All of those are mentioned in the directive as interpretive tools as well. So so our message is very clear to member states: you're misunderstanding the directive if you think that you can have provisions which allow somebody other than trade unions to do collective bargaining.
Thank you. Okay, you have been most patient, Oliver. You are speaking last. Now, can I ask you a favour? If your intervention exceeds 4 or 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you to split it up, because I do want to come back here to Estelle with a question, and then I can come back to you, and we lose her a little bit before the end of the event. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katrina. I will make it as exciting as possible, so maybe you won't cut me off. But first of all, I have to use a few seconds really to thank for the invitation and for this moment, to also to celebrate this important moment where we have this landmark decision now in force. And we were speaking before about paternity, maternity of this initiative, and I'm really honored to be here, being here around some of the mothers and fathers of this directive: Nicola Schmidt, Esther, Agnes, and many others. We in our committee, we don't claim motherhood or fatherhood for this, but I think we are, let's say, obstetricians. Obstetricians, I think, is the name. So we tried at least to be some for this directive, because we have only an advisory function in the ESC, but thanks to Agnes and to Dennis Radke, we were tasked with an opinion already before Nicola Schmidt came out with his proposal. And we tried to pave also a bit the way and to show some possible avenues for such a landmark directive. And therefore, maybe it's also worth it to think about how we managed to come to this proposal and to this decision in the end, because if we see today the political landscape has totally changed. We see that in the mission letters there is a strong focus on competitiveness. That was totally different 4 or 5 years before, but nevertheless it was I think everything else then we couldn't take it for granted that we will come up with such an important directive on wages for the first time. And I think the secret behind this, the recipe behind this, was really a collective effort of politicians, of the European Parliament, together with social partners, especially the trade union and the ETUC, and also other stakeholders. And we tried to contribute to this. And therefore, when we issued our opinion before the proposal for the directive, we already emphasized the relevant fundamental rights, such as to organize, to bargain collectively. We also highlighted the relevant ILO conventions. And we said in the committee, and without any vote against it, so also with the votes of the employers at this time at least, that quality jobs with fair wages are part of the solutions for all Europeans across Europe. And we knew at this time already that there were some concerns about the competence and about the possible undermining of collective bargaining systems. But I think we managed in the end to find something which is flexible enough. I'm coming from Austria, where we don't have any statutory minimum wages. We had also concerns years ago, but this is now a different time, and we fully agree that we need European action in this field, and it leaves enough flexibility to member states that they can also continue with their national wage setting systems. And I think this is absolutely important. And to say, also to mention, because we have also the rapporteur here in the House from the committee, we also issued then an opinion on the concrete proposal. And also in this opinion, which was not unanimously supported, but at least by a big majority in our committee, we also supported the objectives of the directive, and we underlined that it's absolutely important and necessary to adopt this opinion. We also already mentioned points like public procurement as one of the key points how to implement this directive in the different member states, and I think now we have to use these all these instruments. I would also like to say it's we see the elections in the US. We see that big business is not only lobbying now, but taking over parts of the government. So this is a different situation. But at the same time, staying in the US, we had also recent votes in states like Missouri, Alaska, and Nebraska, where the vast majority of citizens voted for higher minimum wages. So I think they are also encouraging signals, and we can build on this. And so let me maybe to conclude, because I know with one point which is for me also very challenging for the future. We have to implement this directive in member states, but if we look in all the mission letters, we are speaking also about enlargement during this period. It could be that first, or some countries, or at least one country, could join the European Union in this next 5 years period. And I think we cannot afford to make the same mistakes like before in previous enlargement rounds, that we started too late to strengthen structures there for collective bargaining, for social dialogue. I think we have to start now. And we are talking here about capacity building, but this is not enough. This is not enough. We have to make this a clear criteria. We have to encourage governments in candidate countries to take already action now to empower social partners and trade unions, and if necessary also to change legal frameworks. I think the 80% target should be also a commitment for candidate countries. And this is not to prevent anybody from joining the European Union, on the contrary, but make it really a success in the end. So I would really strongly emphasize for the next Commission to put a lot of attention to this, and to encourage and to strengthen social partners and trade unions already now in the candidate countries. I think this is an integral part of the minimum wage directive and collective bargaining of our European economic and social model. You asked at the beginning about competitiveness. In our committee, we clearly say competitiveness must be sustainable competitiveness, and social rights, the right to collective bargaining, can never be in contradiction to competitiveness. It's really an instrument to foster competitiveness. I think if we all agree on these principles, then we should work together, all components, employers, trade unions, to make this a success, and to defend our European social model, and to make it also, to strengthen it also at global level, looking to the G20 social summit. I think there are some encouraging signals as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, so just in the remaining sort of 12 minutes that we have, this, going back to the title, you know, the collective bargaining, the minimum wage, a fair wage as a prerequisite for competitiveness. Just when I look at the EU's 9 key drivers of EU competitiveness, the strategy that's been identified, it talks about leveraging private funding, open trade, energy, R&D. You said there's a lot of employers, you know, a lot of costs are going into that. Digitalization, skills, circularity, there's a lot of things there. My question, just as a layperson, is there really an understanding, a belief in a fight that competitiveness isn't an end in itself? It's a process. It's the way that Europe lives and breathes. So is there enough understanding that that means that workers are adequately considered in that productivity, that they benefit, that they contribute, and that is an important cost? Is there enough understanding of that? Are we trying to sideline that? I'm not sure there's enough understanding of the human at the center of competitiveness. I guess that's my question. Any thoughts?
D'abord, je trouve que le titre du débat est un peu provocateur. Parce que notre objectif global, c'est pas la compétitivité n'est pas une fin en soi. C'est toujours la question, effectivement, est-ce que l'humain doit être là pour l'économie, ou est-ce que ça doit être l'économie au service de l'humain? Donc, évidemment, c'est cette question-là. Et donc, moi, je ne suis pas ici que pour renforcer la compétitivité de l'Europe. Il doit y avoir évidemment un triangle toujours et un équilibre entre l'économique, le social et l'environnemental. Hein. C'est le principe même du développement durable, comme on le veut aussi aujourd'hui. Et donc l'un ne doit pas aller sans l'autre, l'un ne doit pas primer sur l'autre. Et donc voilà, la compétitivité n'est pas une fin en soi. On doit évidemment relocaliser beaucoup d'activités européennes. On doit effectivement s'assurer qu'on accompagne correctement aussi, on réponde aux défis climatiques et qu'on accompagne les travailleurs dans ce défi climatique. Mais donc voilà, il faut travailler avec un triptyque et certainement pas en tout cas faire en sorte, et c'est ça le problème qui revient aujourd'hui justement avec ce retour du dogme de la compétitivité, c'est qu'on doit vraiment s'assurer que les travailleurs soient pris en compte, parce que d'un autre côté, on ne répondra pas aux objectifs de compétitivité et de productivité et autres, et aux enjeux même en termes économiques, si demain, on n'a pas justement des travailleurs qui sont bien formés, avec de bonnes conditions de travail, de bonnes conditions de salaire, et aussi de bons systèmes de sécurité sociale, parce que ça c'est l'autre aspect, c'est que rappelons-nous quand même que nos salaires ne sont pas non seulement les ennemis de l'économie, puisqu'ils soutiennent la demande intérieure, mais ils sont d'abord aussi ceux qui, malheureusement, parce qu'il y a une justice fiscale qui n'existe pas, mais enfin, ils sont quand même ceux qui financent nos systèmes de protection sociale et les questions de redistribution des richesses. Donc voilà. Or, qu'est-ce qu'on a eu au lendemain de la Seconde Guerre mondiale, donc de grande crise? C'est la raison pour laquelle on a obtenu des systèmes de protection sociale et notamment pour s'assurer qu'on ait des travailleurs qui soient bien formés et en pleine forme pour soutenir une relance qui était nécessaire. Donc, ça doit aller de pair. Et donc, c'est évidemment ça le problème, c'est que pour le moment, on sent qu'à nouveau, alors que sous la précédente mandature, on se rendait compte qu'il nous fallait un socle européen des droits sociaux. Il faut revenir effectivement avec des objectifs sociaux. Ici, on est à nouveau, alors qu'on vient de traverser deux crises incroyables, que ce soit celle du Covid ou que ce soit celle qui ont fait suite notamment à la guerre en Ukraine, notamment des crises du pouvoir d'achat et d'inflation importante. Maintenant, on est en train d'essayer de nous faire revenir sur des enjeux et tout au service de l'économie. Et ça, il n'en est pas question. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle, en tout cas, moi, je sais qu'Agnès m'a passé quelque part le flambeau en me disant, écoute, Estelle, il faut, même si quelque chose n'a l'air pas vrai, et je suis d'accord avec toi, il faut chaque fois revenir et remettre les choses sur la table et les répéter. Et ce sera effectivement notre rôle. Si ce n'est pas clairement dans les lettres de mission de Madame Minzatou, aussi travailler sur la question de la qualité de l'emploi et d'emploi de qualité, ce sera évidemment le biais pour revenir sur la question d'avoir de bons salaires et de bonnes conditions de travail, parce qu'il n'y a que comme ça que nous aurons aussi une bonne économie au niveau européen et une bonne compétitivité.
Thank you. I mean, I just, again, I should let it finish, the interpretation. I mean, this issue of, you know, the importance of workers of all stripes having good skills, being in good form, having the right salary, having the right conditions, having the right work-life balance as a necessary prerequisite to contribute to competitiveness. I'm just wondering, in these challenging times when you see business and industry in so many quarters laying people off because they say the costs are too high, or we cannot raise a salary, we're going to quit Europe, we cannot compete, you're asking too much. Where is that balance to be struck? And is there not enough of a kind of a real understanding that without those workers and all the benefits that need to underpin them, they won't be able to compete. They cannot be productive.
I don't think this is an issue of lack of understanding, but a lack of will. Huh? Because I think it's already now clear enough that trickle-down economy, let's grow the pie, then everyone gets a bigger part of the pie. That's nonsense. And that was the lessons which we laid down in the European pillar, which is part of the minimum wage directive, which is pushing for this idea of collective bargaining. But of course, there are people who didn't like this whole process. There is a big pushback from the business side, who are trying to do as if it's indeed about let's grow the pie, and how do we grow the pie by bringing down the cost. I think if you look closely at what is happening, business is also playing a very risky game, because if all leading economic minds are saying that isn't true. It's not true that if the pie is growing, everyone gets a bigger part of the pie. If you're still pushing this storyline, you will see that people also, being at national level or at the European level, think that if this economy isn't taking care of me, why should I take care of the economy? And I think there is a clear risk of playing into the hands of extreme right, playing into the hands of the extreme voices. I think there is a real risk of business indirectly supporting the extreme right. And although perhaps the story will not be that easily upheld in the next 5 years, that doesn't make it a true story. We should keep telling this and indeed push for fairness, and competitiveness is not the same as fairness.
Thank you. And may I ask you to just give small thanks and applause to our MEP, who, as you all do, has a very busy schedule, as I know you all do, which is why we're going to finish on time. But thank you so much. I'm actually... I just sort of leave open to come to you both what you've heard, what you would like to add to the, specifically to the topic of this second panel.
Well, we met with Mario Draghi, and he was very clear with us that wages were not the reason for the lack of competitiveness in the EU. And he said that very clearly in his report, and he said it during the press conference. And he went out of his way to say that, to exactly stop this argument with, say, growing legs and beginning to walk around the building. He also said that productivity in Europe was low, not because workers in Europe weren't working hard, we are. It was a lack of investment. And he was very clear that the challenge for Europe is investment, and the lack of investment, both in companies and innovation, but also in public services. Because if workers cannot afford to have a home, cannot afford to get to work, cannot afford to buy food, then there's a problem that you work hard and you can't afford all of that. Then the economy's not working. Our own research showed, for example, that this year 2 million more people were not able to afford a week of a holiday. Now, it sounds like a small thing, but I think it's indicative of the problem. Like, we wonder why the hospitality sector is struggling. We wonder, you know, you meet politicians and they throw their hands up and say, is it because we're not competitive? Maybe we should pay people less. It's the exact opposite. It's that we need to pay people more so that they can afford to spend the money in the real economy. And that's the big factor that's, I think, missing out of all of the political discussion about the economics of all of this. And Torsten will confirm this. Higher minimum wages are better for the economy. In America, where you've got you've got two states beside each other, one with a minimum wage and one without. The one with the minimum wage does better. It increases its minimum wage. And contrary to all the forecasts of this being a catastrophe, it's actually great for the state. You know, things improve. So there's a moral argument, but there's also a strong economic argument for raises of the minimum wage, but also for a fair distribution of the wealth that everybody is working hard to create, and also to ask the question about is it acceptable that profitable companies take the profit as share buybacks or as dividends and don't invest in innovation, don't invest in the workforce, and don't invest for the just transition. Obviously, from the trade union movement, we say no, and we need our policy makers to step in and to hold them to a better standard than that.
Thank you. Oliver, last word to you, I think, before I invite back. Yes, because it needs to be almost to the minute. Don't look, that she is the boss, not me. There you go. All right.
Okay, then let me just confirm also from our side that competition based on lower wages, I think it's nothing which really is appropriate for a developed economic model that we have in Europe. And I think also employers see this when I discuss with them from Eastern European countries, for example, where they had a system based on lower wages without collective bargaining. Now they have a huge gap, gap in skilled workers, and workers in general. So I think there is now a need to adapt, and I think we should not make this mistake again due to a difficult economic situation that we have in the moment. But we should not put at risk the principles that we always underline. So I think the system is flexible enough that we can use it. But I would not accept the argument that our wages are in general too high. Esther just said it, and according to the Eurobarometer from spring 2024, even 11% of workers with full-time work are even unable to cover basic needs despite working full-time. So I think this is the best proof that we, in general, we don't have higher wages are not the problem. Let's say it like this. Thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, as you said there, you know, you learned lessons, very strong lessons, you know, after this austerity period. The point, of course, that I will say is, you know, let us learn from history. We're rubbish at it, aren't it? It's not even we're rubbish at it, we don't even want to. That's the thing. But I think we are sufficiently close and not even out of the wake of that history to be able to do better. But as you say, and you said, as Torsten said, it's a constellation, very particular, you know, that was a time, that was a window of opportunity. That is not an excuse to make sure, but the work is cut out to make sure the implementation stays so that we can keep that going. So over to you, Gabby.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone that gave their input here for the debates. I want to take up at the finish here the picture that Esther used with the directive as a shield. If you want a shield to protect you, it needs to be properly handled, because otherwise it's just a decoration. And also at the same time, and this is what we are discussing, at the same time, you also need to have the necessary muscles to use it, because otherwise you will also not be able to use it. And this is where we have to continue to work on, because the shield alone in itself is not enough. So it was a moment to celebrate, but also to look at what the work is ahead of us to do here. And especially in a time where people have the feeling that with the rising prices, they cannot cope anymore, and they get exhausted, and they lose trust. Here, the implementation also comes at the right timing here, and I think we have to build up a strategy. Indeed, next year the Commission has to do the report on the implementation. The Parliament will have to play a role here, the Ample Committee, in giving ideas for that, and also having an own strategy to make sure that this shield can indeed protect also in the future. And I'm sorry, I have to leave, because at the moment we are negotiating if we will have a new commission next week or not, and a lot of hot emotions and decisions to take, so I will run out, but I thank everyone, and we keep in touch, working.
Thank you. I don't think emotions are ever not hot in the European Parliament. Thank you so much. And just a reminder on those last words of what Elmar said. When all of those different kinds of workers of all different stripes and ages were manifesting, that's what they were saying. This is what the EU has put in. And as I said, it's not easy to get those stories out there of the EU added dimension. This is a good one. Can I give warm thanks to these good speakers? Can you give very warm applause, please? Thank you. Thanks to all of the speakers. Can we just, mindful to thank the interpreters. They work extremely hard with some amazing brain wizardry. Thank you to the audience here and to all of you online for being with us. Fly, be free, and I wish you much luck, passion, and grit in your ongoing endeavours. Thank you.